Step into the dazzling world of CZ Guest, a Boston Brahmin who electrified 20th century high society with her rebellious charm and timeless elegance. Born Lucy Douglas Cochrane, in 1920 she transformed from a debutante into a cultural icon, captivating gossip columns, Hollywood studios, and even Diego Rivera's canvas. Known for her scandalous burlesque stint, equestrian prowess, and gardening empire, CZ's life was a masterclass in defying convention while radiating sophistication. From her headline-making debut to her serene Long Island gardens, this deep dive explores the lesser-known facets of a woman who danced through scandal and style with unmatched poise. Perfect for fans of fashion history, socialites, and mid-century glamour, these insights reveal how CZ Guest shaped an era. Discover her journey from Boston's ballrooms to global fame and why her legacy still blooms today. Lucy Douglas Cochrane, born February 19, 1920, but nobody in the room imagines that the string of syllables on her birth certificate will survive for long. She will grow into many things: glittering society rebel, reluctant cover girl, headline magnet, and very soon a teasing brother peering into the bassinet will waggle his finger and call her Sissy. Children shorten everything, and Sissy flips into the brisk modern consonants of CZ. 2 letters, a period each, sharp as diamond studs. So much quicker for newspaper type and gossip columns than the flowery Lucy Douglas. Now pan back and study the pedigree. The Cochrane name sits high among the so-called Boston Brahmins, a caste that talks about money only by pretending it doesn't matter, and measures a person's worth by the century of the family silver rather than the size of the bank account. Alexander Lynn Cochrane, her father, is an investment banker who wakes before dawn to scan ticker tape and slips back home in time to carve the roast before anyone notices his absence. He speaks in a calm, surgical baritone that can soothe the stumbling corporation as efficiently as it can hush a dinner party. Nothing flashy, nothing vulgar, just the confident hum of compounded interest and compound sentences. Across the dining table sits Vivian Hervey Wessel, a New Yorker by birth, a stage creature by blood, and a classically trained opera singer by passionate, inconvenient choice. Imagine her, black velvet gown, a glint of emerald earrings, laughter rising like a champagne cork, and an aria that can float to the second-floor landing without a microphone. To the true Blue Boston set, a professional on the stage is little better than a traveling magician, or worse, someone who sells tickets to emotion. There is, they sniff, nothing more suspect than putting a price on one's own applause. Yet Vivian's very presence, her unapologetic vibrato and Manhattan frankness, will ignite the first quiet scandal that curls around the Cochrane family like a wisp of pipe smoke. Little CZ grows up in rooms so large that echoes outlast conversations. She learns to stamp her presence early, because servants glide in and out like well-tailored ghosts, completing every task before the child can think to try. Ties are tied, shoes polished, sheets whisked away and replaced while she is at breakfast. The scent of fresh starch lingering in the air like lemon in a glass of iced tea. Naturally, mundane skills never stick. Decades later, CZ will wave off the idea that she might boil an egg or tuck a hospital corner. Why on earth would I waste breath on that when Latin verbs never got me a dancing partner? Her childhood report cards arrive spattered with cryptic comments: distracted, irrepressible, struggles to focus. A later generation of doctors armed with acronyms would probably slap ADHD on the file and prescribe a schedule. In the 1920s, Boston teachers simply fold their hands and sigh as the Cochrane girl bounces from window to window, tracing cloud animals on the pane while algebra unspools unheard at the chalkboard. Outside the classroom, And especially outside the rules, CZ is in her element. She slides down the banisters of the family's summer place on the North Shore, hair ribbons snapping in the sea breeze, and directs impromptu plays in the carriage house, casting the gardener as a gallant duke and the cook's assistant as a doomed heroine. It isn't that she despises discipline. She simply values a more electrifying currency: status. In her quicksilver mind, social standing is the lodestone that pulls every compass needle, the secret engine powering every invitation, every romantic glance, every hush that falls when a really important name is spoken. Who needs declensions when a well-timed smile can open doors Latin never dreamed of? By 17, the restless energy needs a formal stage, and Boston society provides one with fussy grandeur. It is 1937, a year when the world's politics crackle like static, but inside America's drawing rooms, the waltz tempo spins, just as it always has. CZ's coming out is scheduled for late autumn. The debutante ritual designed to announce that a girl, properly polished, is now eligible for the grand dance of marriage and money. Most families rent a hotel ballroom, hang tasteful garlands, and hope the evening passes without spilled punch. The Cochrane sisters, CZ'd and her elder sibling Nancy, do not traffic in understatement. They set their sights on the family mansion itself, a rambling estate whose limestone facade already resembles a corner of Paris. Why not complete the illusion? Overnight hired artisans transform the reception hall into a left bank street scene, simulated cobblestones underfoot, lampposts crowned with flickering bulbs, painters touching up shop signs that read boulangerie and fleuriste. Step through a velvet curtain and you exit the scene for an English garden of topiaries, fairy-lit lilac trees, and a string quartet perched beneath a wrought iron gazebo. When the first guests arrive, lace collars flutter and monocles wobble. Tradition, Boston's sturdiest cornerstone, is having its china rattled. The party roars on. Peals of laughter echo down colonnades. Foxtrot rhythms slip into hot swing as midnight approaches. By 2 a.m., the quartet has collapsed in relief, and an impromptu jazz piano pounds out riffs that drift over the moonlit lawn. A butler, lips pinched in disapproval, tries to shepherd stragglers toward waiting Packards, only to be pulled onto the dance floor by Nancy herself. Candles sputter, ice melts, but nobody leaves. Dawn finally paints the sky a shaggy lilac, and sunlight silhouettes a gaggle of bright-eyed debutantes kicking up their heels on what is technically the family's rose parterre. Monday's Boston Globe sums it up in a line that will be clipped and tacked above countless mantelpieces. An extravaganza that left the old guard clutching its pearls. Of course, when a young woman rattles the silver spoons, the silver pens of gossip columnists follow close behind. CZ discovers this in 1939, the summer she turns 19. The North Shore Hostess Association, scrambling for Depression-era publicity, stages a seaside beauty contest and asks reporters to supply adjectives like glamorous and wholesome in equal measure. CZ glides across the judge's platform in a white linen sundress, gaze fixed on some horizon beyond the bleachers, and collects the title Most Alluring Girl on the Massachusetts North Shore, as casually as one collects a bouquet. Cameras flash, headlines sprout. Banker's daughter crowned co-ed Aphrodite. And for the first time, National Wire Services tests drive the initials CZ. Some wag at the Associated Press decides the letters look incomplete, without periods. And just like that, CZZ becomes a brand, a telegram-friendly monogram. The trophy, plaster shell coated in gold paint, might have ended up in a dusty attic, but the competition spins off an unexpected sequel. A theater producer, never one to miss free publicity, offers the newly minted beauty queen a short contract in a touring burlesque revue. It is less tawdry than it sounds, mostly high kick dance numbers stitched together with vaudeville jokes. But for Brahmin circles, burlesque is one flung garter away from perdition. CZ signs anyway, partly for the travel, partly for the thrill of disobedience, and partly because the Depression has taught even gilded families that dollars can vanish faster than reputations. The tour is brief, blink, and you miss it, but long enough for the rumor mill to roar at full speed. One Boston aunt writes a friend in code, lamenting that her niece is risking her posture nightly in smoky halls. Another relative sends a discreet telegram to Alexander Cochrane. Stop her now or never speak of it again. Whether these pleas reach their target, or whether CZ simply grows bored with life on the road, the dancing interlude ends within the year, folded into the scrapbook of her life like a ticket stub pressed behind cellophane. Yet the scandals, real or fabricated, show no sign of stopping. Sometime between curtain calls and the final semester at Miss Porter's, an item pops up on page 2 of the Boston Evening transcript. Heiress spotted at Garden Ice Rink? Is Bruins forward the new flame? The article names no names, but the implication is clear. Our free-spirited debutante has been sharing hot chocolate with professional hockey players, men who sweat for a living and fight on skates, men whose noses have been broken more times than they have consulted a Latin dictionary. To the self-appointed guardians of social decency, an athletic bow is nearly as damning as a vaudeville contract. Whether CZ merely smiled during the intermission of a game or actually twirled in the rink's spotlights makes no difference. The rumor is enough to smudge her calling cards. Grandmothers lean over luncheon tables and whisper that the Cochrane girl is fast, that she is courting disgrace, that she might, heaven forbid, marry outside the invisible wall of inherited respectability. And yet, Boston can't look away. The town that nurtures its legends and stone churches and ivy-clad colleges suddenly discovers it has a homegrown heroine who refuses to shrink into a cameo brooch. Writers send carbon copies of their columns to New York editors explaining that CZ Cochrane is what happens when Beacon Hill marble collides with Broadway footlights. She is the living question mark at the end of an old sentence. Every time the city thinks it has filed her under scandal concluded, she pops the tab and reappears in fresh ink, tilting her chin at the lens, daring a reporter to guess her next move. One brisk October morning, a family chauffeur ferries her downtown in a black Packard with windows polished like opera glasses. A passerby recognizes the profile, that glossy helmet of chestnut hair, the slight upward turn of the mouth, and tips his hat. CZ, lost in thought, barely notices. Above Tremont Street, the air smells of roasted chestnuts and print shop ink. Newsboys shout headlines about Europe's brittle peace, the stock market's jittery rebound, and the Cochrane name woven among them like a bright red thread. She steps onto the sidewalk, heels clicking, skirts lifting slightly in the breeze. And in that moment, she is both part of and apart from the world around her, an avatar of privilege who glances at a newspaper stand and sees her own initials in bold-faced type. 100 nameless eyes follow her progress, some with envy, some with disapproval, some with secret applause. She has not asked for any of it. She has simply refused to play small. Inside the Cochrane household, dinner-time discussions are choreographed exercises in controlled emotion. Father weighs the latest clipping in one hand and a carving knife in the other, deciding whether the evening's roast or his daughter's public image requires more urgent trimming. Mother, Vivian, whose life on the stage has taught her the value of both applause and controversy, cuts in with a melodic reassurance. She is merely finding her key. Alexander raises an eyebrow. Nancy, the elder sister, passes the potatoes, fully aware that her own debut, while raucous, never quite made the times. The butler pours a second round of Bordeaux crystal chimes. No resolution is reached, nor is one expected. Scandal, they are beginning to realize, is now the family's familiar dinner companion. The city's social arbiters, for their part, attempt a polite quarantine. Invitations to charity balls arrive, addressed to Alexander and Vivian, and Daughters is conspicuously absent. A discreet phone call suggests that this season, perhaps CZ would prefer a quiet evening at home. She does not comply. If anything, the half-shut door invites a sharper push. She appears at the Junior League cotillion wearing a gown that quotes Phryne before the judges. Sleek champagne satin, shoulders bare, the merest suggestion of a classical column. Cameras whirl, tongues follow. A chaperone faints. Heat stroke, the official story. The unofficial version makes the rounds faster than the orchestral waltz. The Cochrane girl has scandalized the assembly by looking like a living statue carved by an artist with modern morals. Meanwhile, the newspapers, never slow to exploit a ready-made protagonist, package her escapades into bite-sized moral tales. One column scolds that money cannot buy refinement. Another sighs that youth in mink, left unmoored, can founder on the shoals of temptation. CZ reads every line, clips the ones that sparkle, ignores the rest. Sometimes, late at night, she wonders whether the ink has stained her soul or merely her gloves. But then sleep claims her, and the morning brings new adventures. A riding lesson that ends with her favorite mare refusing the water jump. An afternoon call from a fashion photographer in New York begging for a weekend sitting. A whispered invitation to a speakeasy revival hidden behind a Cambridge bookshop. Her calendar acquires more layers than an opera cake, each slice sweetened with possibility. That same winter, a handful of Harvard undergraduates organize an informal poll who, among Boston's bevy of debutantes, possesses the charisma to hold her own on the silver screen. CZ wins by a landslide. She will never audition, never hitch her dreams to Hollywood's marquee lights, but the rumor alone inflates her legend. One wag jokes that she could glide past censors because the letters in her name act like little gates, filtering out anything unsavory. Another quips that she travels at the speed of scandal, a comet whose tail is made of newsprint. The metaphors pile up gaudy as Mardi Gras beads, none capturing the precise electric truth. She's a young woman who refuses to apologize for appetite for music, for danger, for applause, for the dizzy swirl of being thoroughly alive. On slow news days, the Boston dailies resurrect older controversies, polishing them with fresh adjectives. They recall how Vivian's operatic career once raised eyebrows in the Brahmin stateroom, or how Alexander's branch of the Cochrane clan, though wealthy, traces its fortune to banking rather than shipbuilding, an affliction akin to being new money if one squints hard enough. Through this lens, CZ's flair appears almost inevitable, the flowering of a rebellious gene nurtured by violin arias and Wall Street telegrams. Readers devour the narrative, comforted by the illusion that every splashy personality springs from a tidy lineage of causes and effects. Yet beneath the headlines and gossip, the private heartbeat of her life continues in quieter syncopation. She wakes at dawn to scribble in a leather diary, sketches of gowns, overheard dialogue, little snatches of lyrical nonsense. She rides bareback along the frosted beach, her breath puffing white against the Atlantic wind. She reads Zelda Fitzgerald's stories and underlines sentences about women who dance on tabletops in hopes the floor will hold. She is, to use her own later phrase, collecting experiences the way boys collect ticket stubs. And experience, she senses, will prove more durable than ancestral crests or beauty queen trophies. Still, every collection has its price, and hers is paid in currency minted by a stern, unspoken code. At garden parties, she overhears whispers, slightly wild, no sense of proportion, a pity, really. An elderly aunt slips her an etiquette manual, 3rd edition, with passages marked in pencil. CZ thanks her, places the book on a shelf, and never cracks the spine. The real lessons she seeks are unfolding in real time, unscripted. For example, the way a single rumor, true or false, can outrun any horse on the polo field, or the way a debutante's smile can brighten a room, yet black out her chances for a respectable match if aimed at the wrong man. These are not textbook truths. They are pulses felt through the soles of silk dance slippers. By early 1940, the world beyond Boston's brownstones marches toward upheaval. Yet local gossip columns still find space to note CZ's whereabouts. Sighted at a matinee of La Traviata, seen driving an open-top roadster along Commonwealth Avenue, reported lunching with a certain defense contract heir. The specifics hardly matter. Each mention acts as a lantern strung along the path of her youth, illuminating a personality too large for the columns meant to contain it. She is 19, going on immortal, refusing to shrink for fear of dulling her own edges. The outrage letters to the editor, the half-hearted disinvitations, the side-eyed glances at the Copley Plaza, it all swirls into the same intoxicating cocktail. She lifts the glass, salutes the horizon, and drinks. The nightclub lights are low, the band is easing into a slow swing, and all across 1940s America the flashbulbs keep popping, hungry for a new face to splash onto tomorrow's front page. Into this restless glow steps a striking young blonde, her real name obscured by more glittering initials, CZ'd, and she's already decided she will never let the era's expectations pin her down. She isn't even 20 when she graduates from Boston's society circuit onto Hollywood's grander dance floor, fueled by a single thought that had been twisting inside her ever since she first watched Katharine Hepburn stride across the screen. Why merely applaud the performance when you can become the performance? That ambition sounds noble enough, yet it arrives wrapped in disarming honesty. CZ Guest, still just CZ Coates back then, knows how to work a confession. She will one day look back at this period with a laugh and admit, darling, all I really wanted was to crash parties with Victor Mature, Bruce Cabot, and Errol Flynn and play tennis every single day. But confessions come only after adventures. So for now she boards the train to Los Angeles with her luggage packed tight, her mother's nerves crackling in the background, and her best party shoes carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Hollywood in 1943 is frantic and fragrant, scented with gardenias, sweat, and the soft tang of nitrate film stock. The studios are churning out wartime escapism, and everybody is auditioning for anything. CZ breezes past the famous gates of 20th Century Fox, catches a casting director's eye by laughing at his terrible joke, and within a week finds herself enrolled in the studio's acting school. It is hardly Harvard, but it demands 6 straight months of discipline. Voice projection in the morning, fencing and dance in the afternoon, script study until midnight, repeat. Outside, Rolls-Royces idle by the palm trees. Inside, agents prowl the corridors, looking for the next sure thing. CZ waltzes through the lessons, quick to learn but quicker still to recognize that she would rather be the wittiest guest in the room than the most diligent student at a lectern. Her first real taste of show business glitters closer to home. One June evening on the rooftop of Boston's Ritz-Carlton, where the hotel has converted its open-air terrace into a wartime variety show. The stage is nothing more than a few punchy spotlights battling the Atlantic breeze, yet the atmosphere feels positively celestial. CZ doesn't have a starring role. She's there to add sparkle, to prove she can dance without tripping over the electrical cords. The applause is quick and kind, and when she steps into the elevator afterward, feathers still shivering on her costume, she understands how performing can electrify a life in mere minutes. By the time Ziegfeld Follies of 1944 invites her aboard, she has mastered the twirl and smile that makes producers sign contracts on the spot. The Follies, legendary for turning pretty faces into household names, is restaging its show for a war-weary Manhattan audience hungry for laughter. CZ slides into the lineup with practiced poise, learning comic timing from dancers who can land a joke on a dime, discovering that applause can feel like a warm bath poured over every nerve ending in her body. The press takes note, especially the glossy gossip weeklies that feed Middle America its diet of extravagance, and rumors trickle west to Los Angeles faster than Western Union can wire them. Fox finally offers her an actual film contract. It is the golden ticket every stage hopeful dreams of, yet it also demands endless days of waiting for rewrites, for reshoots, for directors to call, for the perfect role that never quite arrives. She wakes before dawn, reports to the backlot classroom, repeats tongue twisters, swishes through mock dance numbers, fences imaginary foes, and practices sobbing on cue. 6 months slide by like watered-down glass, and still no camera rolls for her. Somewhere around the 3-month mark, she realizes she is spending more time at the studio tennis courts than in rehearsal rooms. Errol Flynn often mans the opposite baseline, handsome and reckless. A married man almost twice her age, volleying both flirtation and topspin in equal measure. After practice, she cools off at the canteen, joking with Bruce Cabot and Victor Mature until the clatter of trays is drowned out by their laughter. If there is an apprenticeship to Glamour, she is serving it now, one martini at a time. Victor Mature is the first to blur the line between partner and pastime. He is tall, broad-shouldered, and finishing a day on the set of Samson and Delilah when he spots her under the commissary's striped awning. Their chemistry is instant, playful, and not especially discreet. Hedda Hopper peppers her column with hints. Boston debutante CZ Coates seen arm in arm with screen hunk Victor M. Luella Parsons replies from across town with something cattier. Never underestimate the power of a blonde who can run a baseline and steal a leading man in one afternoon. For CZ, the headlines crack open a new addiction. She adores stealing the spotlight by doing nothing more than being herself. The gossip, of course, multiplies when Errol Flynn steps into the picture. He's Hollywood's favorite swashbuckler, and though he is married, that ring never seems to shrink his fan club. To be courted by Flynn is to be spoon-fed danger. The whiskey on his breath is as smooth as the compliments rolling off his tongue. CZ knows the score. She's no ingenue, but she cannot help savoring the thrill. She is 19, maybe 20, depending on which reporter you trust. He is pushing 40. Flynn's reputation for living hard suits her temporary ambitions perfectly. No one throws a more raucous soiree. No one arranges a backlot tennis match with more mischief. For a glorious, overheated season, she bounces between his Beverly Hills parties and Victor Mature's convertible joyrides, sometimes wearing the same pair of satin heels 2 nights in a row, because who has time to change when the champagne never stops flowing? Yet the same headlines that electrify her nights also poison her mornings. Movie studios do not adore bad press unless it translates into ticket sales, and CZ, still an apprentice, still unmarketed, hasn't yet earned them a dime. One afternoon, her agent sits her down in a bungalow whose window shades are already drawn against potential photographers. He explains gently that her rising notoriety does not compensate for her still invisible resume. The gossip columns shout her name, but the casting sheets never mention it. She nods, shrugs, and makes a decision that will astonish most dreamers. She lets the acting contract hang there in limbo. No screen test, no small role in a wartime melodrama, not even a walk-on cameo. She slides her monogram pen back into her purse and heads for the nearest tennis court instead. The court becomes her sanctuary whenever Southern California heat shimmers off the asphalt. Her serves grow sharper, her sun hats wider, her social circle increasingly athletic. Bruce Cabot lobs easy ones so she can practice her overhead smash. Victor Mature bets $20 a set and never collects. Fox's talent coaches notice her tan more often than her technique, but that is fine by her. She is, by her own cheerful admission, in Hollywood simply to have a splendid time. And for a while that splendid time feels endless. Around the spring of 1945, after the war in Europe ends, but Hollywood's party refuses to, a chance invitation changes her scenery. A fashion editor she knows is heading to Mexico City to write about the post-war art boom and insists CZ join her. The idea of fresh gossip south of the border is irresistible. She packs a steamer trunk, kisses Errol Flynn farewell, and boards a prop plane humming over the Gulf of California. Once on the ground, she is greeted by a sensory carnival. Mariachi trumpets in the square, incense curling from cathedral doors, and a palette of colors so vivid it makes Hollywood's Technicolor look drab. One evening, at a rooftop fiesta thick with mezcal and tobacco smoke, she notices a broad-shouldered man sketching furiously in a corner. His clothes are paint-splattered, his demeanor brusque, and his eyebrows melt into a single stern line, a living exclamation mark. A friend whispers the name almost reverently, Diego Rivera, muralist of national myth, husband of Frida Kahlo. CZ has never met an artist whose canvases eat walls for breakfast. Rivera measures her with the quick intensity of someone deciding whether marble is worth carving. Before midnight, he declares that he must paint her. Not a polite fashion portrait, but a full-length nude. She blinks, then laughs, then shrugs that easy shrug she's perfected for every outrageous proposition since stepping off the New York Central a few years earlier. "Why not?" she answers. "I've got nothing else on tomorrow's schedule except sunbathing." The sittings unfold inside Rivera's high-ceilinged studio, where unfinished murals lean against each other like sleeping giants. He arranges a scarlet shawl beneath her, places a ceramic jaguar mask at her feet for symbolism, and begins. Days stretch into weeks. The sounds of Mexico City drift through open windows. Street vendors crying tamales, buses grinding their gears, Frida Kahlo sometimes clinking mugs in the kitchen next door. Rivera works with monumental purpose, building her figure out of ochres and umbers until her skin seems lit from within. CZ is fascinated by his deliberate pace, so unlike Hollywood's frantic hurry-up, and even more fascinated by his stories of revolution, betrayal, and art's raw power. She feels herself transformed from socialite into subject, from gossip page cameo into living iconography. When the final brushstroke lands, she catches her reflection in the canvas and gasps. There she is, immortalized and unclothed, gaze steady, posture unapologetic. It is breathtaking, a little shocking, and absolutely free of Hollywood's artificial gloss. She wonders what her Boston friends would say, but quickly dismisses the worry with a mischievous grin. Certain moments in life, she decides, are not meant for polite conversation. They are meant for legend. Legends, however, have a way of following you home. By late 1946, she is back in the States, soon to fall in love with Winston Frederick Churchill Guest, dashing polo champion, heir to leisure, cousin to British statesmen. Their romance blooms fast, announced in society columns that had previously tracked her Hollywood antics. The wedding is precisely what one might expect when Boston Elegance marries Anglo-American high society. Orchids by the truckload, champagne by the crate, and pews packed with every surname that ever marched across the social register. Diego Rivera's nude portrait is still drying in Mexico at this point, but stories of its existence have already floated north, amplified by newsroom dramatics. Now comes an unexpected twist. Winston's family, old school to the bone, decides that owning a canvas depicting their new daughter-in-law in the altogether is both improper and inconvenient. So they quietly purchase the painting themselves, ferry it discreetly across borders, and install it in a back room. Nobody outside the inner circle is allowed to visit. There it will hang for years. Hidden treasure, scandalous souvenir, reminding CZ that even the boldest moments of youth can be shuttered by the well-meaning hands of propriety. She giggles whenever she thinks about it, a whole mural kept out of sight, not because she was ashamed, but because someone else was. Yet if the painting is tucked away, the memory of being Rivera's muse is anything but suppressed. She relishes telling the story at dinner parties, savoring the gasp when guests realize she posed for the master whose murals dwarf palaces. The anecdote becomes a calling card, proof that she once danced at the dangerous edge of modern art. And if someone suggests the episode was indecent, she simply arches one perfect eyebrow and asks, "Indecent compared to what? Censoring it?" Meanwhile, the Hollywood episode drifts into the rearview mirror, but never evaporates. She still receives the occasional invitation to a premiere, still finds magazine clippings of her name linked beside Victor Mature's or Errol Flynn's in musty scrapbooks. When pressed by curious friends, she sums those years up in the wittiest shorthand imaginable. "Darling, I wasn't pursuing stardom. I was auditioning for life." Every detail survives inside that remark. The 6 months of acting drills, the rooftop review above Boston's skyline, the Ziegfeld feathers, the tennis flirtations, the contract that gathered dust, and the wild confession that she only wanted to crash parties and swing a racket. Nothing is erased. Everything is transmuted into charm. On quiet mornings in Long Island or Palm Beach, wherever the guests happen to suspend their globe-trotting, she sometimes pads barefoot across the polished floors, trailing a silk robe, and wonders how different her story might read if she had clung to the Fox contract. Would she have ended up typecast as the plucky ingenue? Would she have dodged or embraced the black and white morality clauses that stifled half the town? Would she have even met Diego Rivera or Winston Guest? The questions stay unanswered by design. CZ has always preferred the lived present to the speculative past, and she navigates each new decade with the same crisp grace that dazzled casting agents before the war ended, in the first soft light of a March morning in 1947. Roosters in the alleys are still clearing their throats. The sea breeze smells of salt and rum, and Ernest Hemingway, bare-armed, cigar already glowing, leans against the veranda rail of his whitewashed house, watching guests drift through the garden like bright parrots. He is grinning the lopsided grin that means he's up to something. Today he will play best man of all unlikely things, and he insists on toasting the groom with daiquiris while the band is still tuning. Through the palms, a sleek young polo champion named Winston Frederick Churchill Guest shifts his weight from foot to foot, as if he'd rather be atop a thoroughbred than standing in patent leather shoes. And floating beside him, calm as the eye of a hurricane, is Lucy Douglas Cochrane, CZ to anyone with a scrap of social sense, her blue eyes taking in the scene the way a practiced hostess surveys a ballroom, cataloging assets, potential hazards, and gossip yet to be born. By nightfall, the story will ricochet from Cuban cafes to London clubs. Winston Guest, son of the legendary Frederick Guest and first cousin of Sir Winston Churchill himself, has married the American beauty who could make even Vogue's photographers fumble their lenses. A Hemingway house wedding, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor among the revelers, and everywhere the smell of black orchids and Havana cigars. It is the sort of headline society editors salivate over. Yet if you walked past the open French doors that day and listened, you might have overheard an odd little exchange. Hemingway, in that booming bullfighter's voice, leaned toward CZ and said, "Kid, you know how to ride this bronco?" She shot back, "Ernest, I was born in the saddle." Their laughter floated across the courtyard, while the musicians struck a sudden joyous chord, and for a flash it felt like nothing could touch them, nothing could spoil the picture. That single flash, though, would have to last 35 turbulent years. Fast forward a handful of months, and the new Mrs. Guest is discovering that polo mallets and pedigree do not guarantee a friction-free marriage. Winston is charming, no one denies that. But he is also restless, allergic to boredom, and convinced that danger is a kind of a vitamin. He can fly a plane, break a horse, or play 72 chukkers straight with barely a sip of water. CZ admires his appetite for risk. She just doesn't want to bankroll the hospital bills or worse, the stock market losses. Still, the couple present a united front, even when the newspapers sniff rumors of strain. They dine in public with the impeccable formality of sovereigns, illustrating what CZ later calls their cardinal rule: when in doubt, be courteous beyond reason. They do not fondle in restaurants, do not shout in elevators. They bow, they smile, they pivot. Some evenings the performance is so smooth they fool even themselves. The true glue, however, is candor. Behind closed doors, Winston admits that the boundaries of traditional wedlock chafe him like an ill-cut collar. CZ, ever pragmatic, confesses she feels the same. So they strike a pact, tacit but unmistakable, to allow innocent-looking dalliances bloom into full-blown affairs if either heart desires. "We all do it," one friend shrugs at a Newport dinner, as if infidelity were just another winter sport like ice yachting. Of course it helps that both spouses are magnets. Winston's lean, sun-battered face and thrilling Polo Cup trophies reel in admirers, the way Gatsby's green light lured dreamers across the bay. CZ's chic blonde shell and acid wit lure a more literary crowd, playwrights, painters, the occasional European count. But the guests never flaunt these extracurricular romances. Discretion remains the house religion. Courtesy is the liturgy. That religion gets its first real trial the day Winston announces a new obsession: commercial aviation. America, he argues, is on the brink of an airborne era. DC-4s are shuttling captains of industry from coast to coast in sleek silver hours, and corporate jets can't be far behind. To CZ, it sounds thrilling, until she sees the prospectus. Her husband proposes pouring a mountain of family cash into startup airlines with names no one can remember 5 minutes later. Heavy on dreams, light on engineers, thinner still on paying customers. She bites back her doubts because Winston believes with the fervor of a barnstormer, and he has never missed a 40-yard penalty shot in his life. Surely this is just polo on a bigger, faster horse. For a while the numbers look promising. Flush with adrenaline, Winston expands his holdings, doubling down with a gambler's grin. But clouds gather. First a trickle of late invoices, then a torrent of red ink. Competition stiffens, fuel costs rise. A pilot's strike drags on. By 1963, dinner conversations at their 300-acre Old Westbury estate pivot from horse breeding charts to emergency loan schedules. Winston, eyes bloodshot, whispers of bills climbing toward the unthinkable. $500,000. In 1963 dollars, that's the price of a mid-size Manhattan office tower. CZ nods in silence, mentally scrolling through assets that can be mortgaged, jewels that can be pawned, portraits that can be let go without looking like surrender. They start small. A pair of Renoir that once bathed the stair hall in golden light vanished to a discreet London dealer. A set of George III chairs find a new life in a Palm Beach villa. CZ considers this triage. Painful, yes, but reversible. Someday, she vows, they will buy it all back. Winston tells golf course pals he's scaling down just to free some capital for a silver spree. The line is preposterous yet elegant. Society chews it like after-dinner mints. The truth, though, is ugly. Endless loans stacking atop one another like crooked poker chips. Then on a humid afternoon in 1967, disaster arrives in the form of federal agents. They drive up the pebbled approach, step over sun-bleached dog toys, and march straight into the foyer with long rolls of acid orange tags. Each tag bears a case number, a debt code, and a future auction lot. One agent is so apologetic CZ swears he blushes while affixing a tag to her Mason candelabras. She stands frozen, nails digging crescents into her palms until the men leave. The second the convoy turns back toward the gate, she rips each tag free with a hiss of silk and adhesive. It is theatrical, defiant, completely futile. Within weeks, a full catalog is circulating among America's wealthiest collectors. Important paintings, continental furniture, and objets d'art from the property of Winston F.C. Guest to be sold by order of the United States District Court. The society pages trade the pamphlet like contraband. CZ can almost hear the tittering. Not since Consuelo Vanderbilt's jewelry vanished under the hammer has high society tasted such schadenfreude. Winston tries to mask the humiliation. I'd rather consolidate than stagnate, he jokes at the Brook Club bar, but even the bartender winces. The auction opens at Park Bernay on a rainy Thursday. Rows of gray flannel men and mink-collared women lift paddles with uncanny precision, as if choreographed. Lot after lot, English landscapes, Venetian mirror frames. A Louis XV escritoire flies beyond its estimate, the air electric with both greed and pity. By sunset, the tally sits near $800,000, enough to erase every note and interest penalty. A triumph by the cold arithmetic of finance, but a savage blow to pride. That night, CZ walks the corridors of their mansion, touching blank spots on the wallpaper where masterpieces once hung, half expecting them to flicker back into being like ghosts. Winston breaks the silence at dawn. They are in the breakfast room, each with a coffee so strong it could dissolve silver. When he says, "Plain as a referee, we're selling." They are in the breakfast room, each with a coffee so strong it could dissolve silver. When he says, "Plain as a referee, we're selling the place." No preamble, no sorry, just the verdict. 300 acres of clipped lawns, paddocks, guest cottages, and a Neo-Palladian main house. Gone. The market isn't what it used to be, so they accept the first solid offer and retreat to a 15-acre slice of the North Shore. Lovely in a modest way, but to CZ, it feels as cramped as steerage. She does not weep. That would give the story too neat an ending. Instead, she orders the movers, rehangs the remaining pictures, walks every inch of the new perimeter fence to know exactly how small the world has become. Friends whisper she must be furious or heartbroken or plotting divorce. She is none of those things. She is a realist. She never married Winston for money. If anything, she once joked she married him for polo ponies. But she also understood that real estate and status are woven into the DNA of their set. Property, she muses to her diary, was part of the unspoken bargain. Now the bargain feels lopsided, tugging at her smile like an invisible hook. In quiet corners she grieves for the music room, where Noel Coward once pounded a piano till sunrise, for the lawns where her children, Alexander and Cornelia, had flown kites under watchful bronze urns. Even the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, godparents to both kids, send a note thick with shared discomfort. They know, perhaps better than anyone, how brutal exile from grandeur can be. Motherhood, though, proves a tonic stronger than regret. Alexander grows into an even-tempered young man who can discuss Wall Street yields and Tennessee Williams in the same breath. Cornelia, daring as any Hemingway hero, shows horses at Madison Square Garden by day and flirts with the paparazzi by night. To them, downsizing is barely a blip. Their childhood memories are stitched from laughter and Labradors, not square footage. Watching them, CZ regains a scrap of her old steel. She starts hosting slimmed-down dinner parties, just 12 or 14 guests, which, by her standards, is practically a picnic where conversation flows freer without the burden of 20 footmen filing past. On balmy evenings when the roses smell like peach pie and no one mentions auction catalogs, she almost feels lucky. Winston, for his part, refuses to bow to disgrace. He still strides onto green polo fields with the posture of a general reviewing troops, still pops open a fresh magnum of champagne whenever his team scores the winning goal. But at twilight, when the crowds disperse and the horses have their blankets on, he sometimes lingers in the bleachers, staring across the empty field as though remembering charges he might have led, wagers he should have folded. CZ sees those moments out of the corner of her eye and chooses silence. Courtesy, after all, stretches even across melancholy. Years low. America dances through the summer of love, the moon landing, Watergate. The guests keep gliding, if slightly nearer the ground. They vacation in borrowed villas instead of leased palazzos, accept first-class tickets instead of private jets. CZ cultivates a wry humility that only heightens her allure. Designers clamor to drape her in samples because she never appears desperate for them. She parries nosy reporters with breezy one-liners. A columnist once asked, "How did it feel to lose half your treasures in a single day?" She replied, "Darling, they were just things. The only treasure that matters is daylight." The quote goes viral before viral is even a word. Still, not all scars heal pretty. Whenever she passes the Fifth Avenue windows of the auction house that sold her life's furniture, a pulse of heat rises in her throat. It is not the money. It is the memory of orange tags dangling from priceless frames like prison ID bands. It is the knowledge that, in her circle, appearances are oxygen. To have one's luxury goods marched off stage under the glare of federal order feels like suffocation. The humiliation, she once confided to a childhood friend, was the tragedy of my middle years. Yet tragedies can be instructive. They teach you what you can live without and what you will never surrender again. By the time Alexander heads to college and Cornelia launches a budding acting career, the guests have fashioned a cautious equilibrium. Winston pursues smaller investments, racehorses, fractional real estate ventures that satisfy his itch for risk without courting catastrophe. He still buys silver on occasion, partly because he adores it, partly because the joke about consolidating for silver became an inside gag they refused to retire. CZ rediscovers her talent for gardening, coaxing peonies the size of dessert plates from soil that once sprouted only crabgrass. She writes a tiny, glittering cookbook for Doubleday, 40 pages on how to throw a faultless picnic, which sells briskly, proving you can shed half your empire and still teach the world how to butter corn. In photographs from the late 70s, husband and wife look oddly serene. Winston's hair is salt and pepper now, and CZ has traded A-line skirts for tailored trousers, but the sideways glances between them still crackle with mischief. They know each other's secrets. How many paramours, how many bank drafts, how many regrets, and still choose to stay in the same frame. Friends speculate it's inertia, the more astute suspect affection expressed in that singular dialect of endless courtesy. On a spring evening in 1981 at a charity gala for the Metropolitan Museum, Winston drapes CZ's coat over her shoulders with a ceremonious flourish. Flashbulbs pop and someone murmurs, "They're like royalty." She tilts her chin toward Winston and whispers, "Fake it till we make it, old sport." He snorts. The cameras miss it, and the orchestra strikes up a foxtrot. In 1952, editors at Vogue and Harper's Bazaar couldn't print an issue without her name somewhere on the page. No surprise. The International Best Dressed list had just stamped CZ as a permanent resident, and tailors around Manhattan suddenly treated a fitting with her like a papal visit. By 1959, the Hall of Fame chapter of that legendary list threw open its doors and said, "Madam, you belong with the immortals." What stupefied everyone was the understatement of her look. While Paris went mad for applique and diamante, she championed the main boucher cut. Clean lines, perfect buttons, nothing screaming for attention. She could drift from breakfast in a crisp Adolfo suit to dinner in a discreet Givenchy sheath, and people would later swear she'd changed the color of the sky. Reporters tried to pin down the formula. What makes it CZ? Only to learn that the whole point was not trying too hard. Her style felt homemade, even when it cost a fortune, because she made restraint the boldest luxury of all. Then came July 20th, 1962. There she was, staring back from the cover of Time magazine. No crown, no scepter, just those level blue eyes and that slight, enigmatic smile. The feature inside wasn't a puff piece. It was a grand tour of American society, a social X-ray in which CZ appeared less as a mannequin than as a compass. She was the person you examined to figure out where the needle of taste was pointing. The editors understood that the country, on the cusp of the space age, yet still nursing its post-war swagger, needed a figure who reconciled Camelot polish with barn door ease. In CZ, they found it. The story landed on every coffee table in America. Somewhere in Hollywood, an ambitious starlet clipped that cover, taped it to her trailer mirror, and whispered, "That's the target." Spotlights aside, the woman herself preferred wind on her face to perfume in a ballroom. Almost every dawn you could find her jogging down to the stables, tightening the girth on her favorite hunter, and taking the hedges at a gallop while dew still jeweled the fence rails. She gave her mounts names that sounded like inside jokes and could talk veterinary science with the best groom on the payroll. 10 minutes later, she might be smashing volleys on the tennis court, white skirt snapping as she sent another opponent scrambling along the baseline. Social commentators like to call her a patrician orchid. Friends knew better. She was half thoroughbred, half Pancho Gonzalez with a killer backhand, happy only when muscle and sunlight were conspiring to carve her lungs wide open. But fate has a macabre sense of timing. In 1976, on a course she jumped 100 times, the horse stumbled. One moment she was soaring over a stone wall with the reins floating. The next she was tangled in a thunderstorm of hooves and turf. The silence that followed felt like outer space. When the doctors finished counting fractures, they told her the one thing she never expected to hear: riding days are over. Imagine the blow. That daily communion with speed and danger snapped away in a heartbeat. Reporters who had once begged for fashion tips now huddled outside the hospital, asking if the icon's spirit had cracked. They didn't know CZ. She lay in bed plotting her next act. And there, in the scent of the get-well bouquets, she recognized a calling older than any runway, the garden. As soon as she could hobble outside, she plunged her hands into dirt and let the cool earth tell her there was still rhythm in life. Before long, a local editor called, asking for a paragraph or two on roses. She submitted 1,100 words that danced like champagne bubbles. Readers loved it. The New York Post inked a regular column, and within a year, syndication lifted her voice onto 350 front porches every Sunday morning. Housewives in Kansas trusted her as much as blue blood matrons in Newport because she spoke plain English. Compost is just yesterday's salad dressed for church. Nobody had ever sounded so refined and so neighborly at once. When CZ decided to write a book, she rang her old pal Cecil Beaton and said, "Darling, I need pictures that smell of lilacs." Beaton, that wizard of gloss, produced illustrations for her debut volume, First Garden and Truman Capote. A man who could barely crawl out of bed some mornings roused himself to pen the foreword. The trio formed a time capsule of mid-century glamour. The photographer, the novelist, the muse, turned horticultural sage. First Garden hit the shelves smelling like June after rainfall, and nurseries across America sold out of climbing roses by breakfast. As her green empire grew, she sensed one more gap in the market. Most insect repellents reeked like a chemistry exam, so she commissioned a perfumer to blend citronella with hints of verbena and white tea. The result was an eau de bug-off that made gnats retreat and dinner guests lean closer to catch the fragrance. She slapped her signature on a line of gardening gloves, pruning shears, and watering cans elegant enough for a museum pedestal. Fans bought in droves, but the merchandise wasn't vanity, it was therapy. After her husband passed away, she confessed that nursing seedlings, scribbling columns at dawn, and lecturing about soil pH to packed auditoriums kept the grief from colonizing every room of the house. Organic methods, she believed, mirrored emotional healing. Feed things gently, let the worms do their work, and trust the unseen to stitch the world back together. Meanwhile, the social carousel turned and many a glittering friendship spun off its hinges. Truman Capote, once the darling of every drawing room from the plaza to Palm Beach, began to unravel. His chapter, La Côte Basque 1965, a diamond-tipped dagger disguised as fiction, exposed the private sins of the very women who adored him. Then came Answered Prayers, an unfiltered acid bath that scalded reputations to the bone. Whole brunch tables exploded in betrayal, but somehow CZ emerged with scarcely a scratch. People said she'd escaped the bloodbath because Capote respected the way she never weaponized gossip, never treated friendship as currency. When his phone stopped ringing and the bars started opening at noon, she answered his calls. She listened when listening was torture, poured coffee when his hands shook, laughed at jokes she'd heard twice already, just to remind him that someone still saw the boy from Monroeville, who once believed words could save a soul. Capote dubbed CZ one of his swans, those swan-necked sophisticates who glided through the plaza fountain without rippling a feather. Yet of all the flock, Babe Paley, Slim Keith, Gloria Guinness, CZ possessed the quietest grace. She never needed to drown enemies in sparkle. She preferred a cotton blouse and a straw basket filled with zinnias. The tabloids could neither inflate nor deflate her, because her ego was tethered to something deeper than column inches. She'd stand in a greenhouse at dawn, breathe the steam that rose off wet potting mix, and feel authentic in a way no society page could validate. Through the late 1970s, while disco glittered and Watergate festered, she toured garden clubs from Savannah to Santa Barbara, preaching mulch and mercy. Lecture halls overflowed. Women arrived thinking they'd take notes on tulips and left with a new doctrine. Beauty is maintenance spiked with daring. When an audience member complained that slugs decapitated her hostas, CZ leaned into the microphone and said, "Pour a saucer of beer beside the plant. If the slugs must die, let them die happy." The room erupted. She showed that humor could be fertilizer too. Over the next decade, she produced 3 more books, each one less about plant Latin and more about horticultural philosophy. She wrote as though hydrangeas had personalities and compost piles dreamed of reincarnation. Her sentences mimicked garden paths, casual curves leading to sudden glimpses of something vast and ordered. Schools invited her to speak about organic practice long before it became a marketing buzzword. She insisted that children taste a cherry tomato still warm from the vine. Only then, she said, would they understand why Mother Nature deserved a standing ovation. None of this meant she retired her fashion crown. Photographers still lay in wait outside the Carlisle to catch that flash of blonde hair and the trench coat belted just right. She continued slipping into Mainboucher for charity galas, slid into Adolfo Neitz for museum luncheons, and on daring nights nodded to Paris with a subtle Givenchy column cut. Yet even at those black tie affairs she could sense the tug of loam beneath her nails, the quiet promise of seeds sleeping back home in the greenhouse. Eventually, society writers dropped their pens in surrender. CZ wasn't a contradiction. She was proof that refinement and earthiness are siblings, not strangers. You might assume that maintaining such a dual life required armies of assistants. The truth is, she kept the circle tight. She believed too many handlers smother spontaneity. If she needed advice, she phoned her children, who had grown up thinking it normal for mom to discuss heirloom beans with one breath and Balenciaga with the next. They joked that the only inheritance worth fighting over would be the compost heap. Black gold, she called it, better than stock dividends. As the millennium's end approached, she watched trends come and go like fruit flies. Minimalism, maximalism, grunge, power suits, each claimed a moment. Through it all, her blueprint never changed. Respect proportion, honor comfort, trust your instincts. In gardens, she preached the same gospel. Read the soil, follow the sun, plant what thrives rather than what shouts. She loved a rebel blossom. Yet she understood that rules exist because some flowers can't stand chaos. Fashion critics finally realized they were listening to a horticultural dialect, silhouettes as garden beds, accessories as blossoms, each ensemble a living ecosystem. She had fused 2 worlds without a manifesto, only a life. In 1982, the shock of Winston's death had struck like a rogue wave. One moment they were seated together in their customary corner booth at 21, debating whether to spend Christmas in Palm Beach or at Old Westbury. The next, she was standing alone at the foot of a hospital bed, staring at a heart monitor that had chosen finality over rhythm. It is in the nature of social legends to look unflappable, yet in that instant CZ felt all her careful architecture slump. What steadied her in the weeks that followed was dirt, literal dirt, soil under the fingernails, seeds tucked into orderly rows. She turned to gardening with the voracious focus of a general mapping out a campaign, resolved that widowhood would not dampen the bloom of guest roses or the gilt-edged orderliness of her life. Soon her newspaper columns proliferated into books, hefty hardcovers studded with watercolors and practical advice delivered in brisk, almost drill sergeant prose. If you can't pronounce the Latin name, spell it out on an index card and practice. Plants like respect. Grief might have tugged at her sleeve, but it never dragged her off stage. She had been raised to believe aristocracy was an obligation, not a cushion. So she worked, and she preached. CZ liked to announce in a voice equal parts champagne and sword point that the well-born and the well-paid owed the world useful service. Anyone can swoon over a chandelier, she would say, clicking a lighter beneath a taper in her drawing room. But the trick is to pay for the electricity at an orphanage down the road. She said it because she meant it, and also because it separated her from dilettantes who thought good manners were a charitable contribution in themselves. Of course, believing in the responsibilities of privilege did not mean she liked everyone. Mention the 1960s in her presence and watch her upper lip curve into a feline sneer. She loathed the decade, its tie-dye, its protests, its patchouli-swaddled optimism, and she never hid it. The 60s, she once told a hapless junior reporter, were filled with dirty people doing sloppy things. I prefer soap. There was no malice in the remark, only a startling candor fired by an unwavering taste for crisp collars and unrumpled lives. She adored civilization, and civilization to her meant self-control, pressed linen, and a healthy respect for a seating chart. If that sounded old-fashioned, well, she owned every inch of it. CZ's heart, meanwhile, belonged almost entirely to dogs. Big ones, little ones, purebreds, strays. It made no difference so long as they wagged their tails with unblushing devotion. She kept a running count in the domestic ledger she updated every Sunday night. 15 rescues in all, each arriving in some state of calamity and leaving, if they ever left, fat, glossy, and content. I love dogs because they never ask you why you're wearing pearls to weed the zinnias, she joked with guests, though behind the humor lay something quiet and fierce. Dogs never betrayed confidences, never printed photographs, never whispered about heartbreak in the columns of page 6. They simply loved, and that was reason enough to build an ark and welcome every waif that padded across her threshold. Yet for a woman who insisted she was painfully shy, CZ possessed an almost theatrical gift for entertaining, provided the cast list remained short. 24 was her absolute maximum, and she enforced it the way a customs officer guards a national border. At 25, a chair vanished. At 26, the invitation was rescinded. At 27, she simply pretended the interloper had never existed. Why 24? Because that was the exact number of crystal water goblets in her favorite set, the one etched with frosted lyres that caught candlelight like diamonds. Also because at 24, conversation could spiral outward in concentric circles without collapsing into overlapping chatter. She hated overlapping chatter. Ideally, the talk should purr, and purr it did when Truman Capote leaned back to deploy a poison-tipped anecdote, or Salvador Dalí flicked ash from an impossible cigarette while describing an alligator he had once invited to breakfast, or Babe Paley crossed her ankles with a sigh that suggested style was a moral imperative, and she had achieved moral perfection. Capote called her the glacier with a gold heart, and she laughed so hard she nearly spilled her soup. She let Dalí sketch a melting pocket watch on the linen tablecloth because genius, she reasoned, should be indulged until dessert. She even forgave Paley for arriving late one winter night, the lady of CBS having been delayed by a dress rehearsal of Social Triumph somewhere uptown. Forgiveness always came easier in rooms perfumed by gardenias snipped from her own greenhouse, and perhaps, though she never said this aloud because she needed those nights to keep the silence at bay. The boom of conversation, the ripple of silverware, the impeccably timed entrance of the souffle. These were notes in the symphony that replaced Winston's baritone beside her pillow. Then, in 1985, as if she had not already reinvented widowhood, CZ reinvented her wardrobe. One morning she declared that American closets were suffocating beneath stodgy wool and trend-drunk polyester. What women needed, she insisted, was serenity against the skin. So she sketched a capsule collection, just a handful of pieces, hardly more than a sketchbook brought to life, built almost entirely around cashmere. Her sweaters were light as size, stitched in colors that made one think of pomelo rind, dove feathers, early dawn. They were sold in small runs, the way pâtissiers sell macarons, and customers who scored one spoke of the experience the way others described stumbling upon love at first sight. A runway show would have been vulgar. Instead, she invited buyers to tea, laid the garments across chaises like sleeping cats, and let fingertips decide. The cashmere venture was never meant to become an empire. In fact, she enjoyed its modesty. It proved a point. She could still read the rhythm of fashion, could still translate elegance into form and price tag. Besides, gardening remained her true north. She often compared designing knitwear to planning winter beds. Both required patience, a respect for texture, and the courage to snip away what did not belong. A sleeve too long, a branch too crowded, the same ruthlessness applied. And when proofs of her third gardening book arrived in the mail, heavy as bricks but smelling of fresh ink, she clapped her hands like a schoolgirl and set the manuscript beside Winston's framed photograph, as though he might lean forward and add a note in the margin. As the years accumulated, friends noticed she treated time the way a maitre d' treats a late-arriving guest, polite but never obsequious. She spurned dawn whenever possible, preferring to rise at 8, read the obituaries — they were, she said, the only honest journalism left — and then stroll the grounds with whichever dog was most eager. Afternoons were for letters or fittings or interviews, though she imposed a strict embargo on anyone who arrived bearing flip-flops or questions about the counterculture. Evenings reverted to choreography. Cocktails at 7, supper at 8, lights out for strangers at 10, lingering conversation for intimates until the last candle sputtered. The routine looked rigid on paper, but within its frame she felt liberated, a diamond secure in its setting. In private moments, it is impossible to believe she did not have them. She no doubt contemplated aging's slow encroachment. Yet vanity in CZ never bellowed. It whispered. A subtle gloss at the hairline, a dab of powder, a scarf tied so artfully that the phrase turkey neck seemed invented by peasants. When journalists asked her secret, she said, "Darlings, I cultivate good posture the way I cultivate roses. They both demand steaks and sunshine." She could be arch, yes, but the humor was buttered with generosity. If a reporter blushed, she gently changed the subject, usually to Labradors. Her final months unfolded with the deceptive calm of late summer. She wrote short dispatches about winter bulbs, tinkered with plans for a small greenhouse addition, and fussed over the health of an elderly terrier who insisted on riding shotgun every time she drove into town. Friends claimed she seemed indestructible, the eternal debutante in garden gloves. Yet, on November 8th, 2003, breath betrayed her. It began as a flutter, nothing alarming, merely a stubborn catch in the chest while she buttoned a cardigan, and swelled into a breathlessness that sent crockery trembling on the sideboard. A friend, already visiting for lunch, understood at once that Elegance is useless without oxygen, and bundled her into a car. The driveway at Old Westbury flickered past in a blur of copper leaves. The world outside the windshield kept its ordinary pace while, inside, CZ's lungs begged for mercy. She did not make it to the hospital. At 83, she exited life exactly as she had lived it, on her own property, wearing proper shoes, attended by someone who adored her. News traveled fast, though grief traveled faster. Tributes poured in, most fixating on her look as though style were a synonym for soul. The words were flattering, but sometimes insufficient. "Sleek," wrote one columnist. "Regal yet approachable," sighed another. The phrases clinked together like heirloom china, lovely but fragile. Those who knew her recognized that behind the satin gloss stood a will as tough as hickory and a generosity steeled by discipline. She embodied, someone said, luxury tempered by warmth, and the formulation stuck. In a single sentence, it captured that impossible combination of silk scarves tossed onto muddy Range Rover seats, of champagne flutes rinsed at a garden hose, of flawless cheekbones breaking into barnyard guffaws. She was both brass and crystal, and the tension made her incandescent. Even Hollywood joined the posthumous chorus. When the limited series Feud Capote versus the Swans aired, viewers gasped at Chloe Sevigny stepping into CZ's stilettos with a gait that suggested fox hunts at dawn and cocktails at dusk. The performance was a kind of seance, a reminder that to understand Truman Capote's social battleground, you had to understand the combatants, and CZ had been a general in gloves. The show condensed decades into minutes, but one need only watch Sevigny lift an imaginary martini glass to glimpse the real woman's diamond cutter precision.